Now, everyone knows UKIP wants to leave the EU, and after coming second in the Eastleigh by-election, Mr Farage said, people vote for UKIP because they see us offering policy solutions. So let's talk to Nigel Farage today about other policies that will really affect people's lives, and you can speak to him too, of course. 0500 909 693 is the number to call if you'd like to talk directly to him and ask him a question. And you can also watch the interview via the 5 Live website. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, I'll ask you about the EU bill later, but I'd really like to start with income tax, if I may, because it's something really pertinent to people's lives. And as far as I can work out, you say you'd give pretty much everyone in work, effectively, a big tax cut. You want to scrap national insurance for everyone. You also want the lowest earners to keep more of their income. Basic rate taxpayers will pay an income tax of 25%, but they won't be paying national insurance of 12%. And the wealthiest earners won't be paying national insurance, and you'd cut their rate of tax from 45% to 40%.
Well, I mean, the point is we want to cut not just taxes, but government spending too. We've campaigned now since 2005 to get the level at which we start to pay tax up to the equivalent of the minimum wage. Why do we say that? We've got to incentivise people who are on benefit to get off benefit and get back to work. And if you did that in conjunction with not having an open door immigration policy to unskilled labour, we really could get lots of people back into work. National insurance is just a complication. You know, when it was brought in, people thought, well, we pay that bit and that gives us the health service and the pension. Actually, it doesn't. It all goes into the pot. Do you know, the tax code in Britain is 12,000 pages long. Now, I mean, any tax lawyers listening to this will be horrified by what I'm going to say. We would like to reduce the thing, simplify the thing, and yes, we want lower taxes.
They are massive tax cuts. Aren't they the kind of promises a politician makes knowing that they're never going to have to keep them?
Well, you can only do it if you also cut government spending radically. I mean, let's be clear.
Or raise taxes elsewhere.
Or raise income, revenue elsewhere. I mean, one of the examples of the 80s was that when we cut top rate tax, actually what happened was the amount of money we took increased, not decreased. Laffer curve economics, it all gets a bit technical, but if you give people incentives, they work harder.
All those tax cuts are going to cost you, we've worked out, £117 billion. That's 117 billion less coming into the exchequer. And unless you make savings elsewhere or raise, I don't know, VAT, corporation tax, then you're going to be adding billions to the deficit immediately.
Well, let's be frank about the deficit. You know, I mean, there is this false...
But did you accept that? Unless you do something elsewhere, you'll be adding billions to the deficit immediately. If
all we did was propose just to cut taxes and not either, as you say, to raise more revenue somewhere else or significantly cut government spending, then you'd be right. But we are talking about cutting government spending. In 2010, we put forward a manifesto with ideas of how we could save 90 billion sterling a year. Now, like all political parties, we're mid-term in a parliament, and it's up to us before 2015 to show people where the cuts must come to compensate for the tax cuts. But I mean, it is a rational approach, and what we're really saying is this government is going on adding to the national debt by nearly 10% per annum, and we're not having a proper, honest debate about this.
I just wonder how rational it really is. With that, I appreciate we're 2 years from a general election.
Yeah.
For you, there's a bit of work in progress, clearly. But with the help of tax experts and our business unit, we've added up the costs and savings of your plans so far. And this is what we get. You'll save money by leaving the EU, scrapping foreign aid, scrapping UK quangos, scrapping the UK's contribution to EU quangos. You say you'll spend on giving people big tax cuts, scrapping all the national insurance and so on. You'll take defence spending back to what it was. You'll get rid of inheritance tax. You reverse cuts to the police and prison spending. And having done the sums, we reckon so far you've got a shortfall of £67.8 billion.
Well, if that's the case... and I mean, you know, this is debatable because it is work in progress, but even if that was right, the question is, can we do things that would boost the income of the economy by that amount? And we believe, yes. The thing that is crippling private initiative in this country is bureaucracy and regulation. And that's not just a saying. You know, go out and talk to any of Britain's 4.5 million small businessmen and women. Take off from them the excessive burden of employment regulation, health and safety at work, not to mention the massive cost we put on business and everybody with expensive energy because of our frankly loony wind farm project, and you begin to see that you can create fresh growth in the British economy.
So you'd be relying on the private sector then to boost spending spending to that level, nearly 70 billion.
Absolutely. We've got to give the private...
Is that realistic?
Of course it's realistic. You know, we can up the growth of our economy by several percentage points by not being hidebound by EU law on employment, health and safety, and the most expensive of all, the environment.
So you're not worried at this stage about a shortfall of 70 billion?
Well, listen, we will do our sums, but even if I accept your figure for the purposes of this debate, the argument is we've got to create growth, and that is the one thing that the coalition has completely failed to do. Why have they failed? Because, frankly, they're impotent. They don't control the British economy. All the big decisions over how business operates get taken in Brussels.
So let's accept that you will create growth, even though you say the coalition has failed. You'll be able to do that. Help us out here. Where else would you consider raising taxes or cutting spending? What will be your guiding principles?
Well, I mean, you know, the truth of it is that we are living way beyond our means. And one of the most astonishing things...
So what areas would you look at?
Well, I mean, one of the most astonishing areas is the National Health Service. I mean, Labour were elected in 97 on a very strong manifesto pledge to spend more on the NHS. And if you remember at the time, we were spending far less than France and Germany on health as a percentage of our GDP. Labour kept their promise. In fact, they more than kept their promise. We now spend more money than France and Germany on the health service. And yet, if you look at cancer, heart and stroke rates, frankly, we're not measuring up to French and German standards. Why is that? Well, a 44% growth in middle management, an astonishing number of people in the National Health Service with no clinical training at all, a service that has become massively over-bureaucratised. And in fact, in many ways, you know, we probably, of all the countries in Northern Europe, have the disease of bureaucracy worse than anybody else. So let's be frank. There are going to have to be some big public sector job cuts. There is going to have to be significant streamlining, and it will be painful for some people. But we believe that when you've got roughly 8 million people now working in our public services, and yet only 2 million of them are really on the front line, there is plenty of room for cuts and efficiencies.
Right, so how many job cuts in the NHS then?
Well, I don't know, and that's the paper that we've got to produce. But I mean, frankly,
because those people would then add to the welfare budget because they'd be receiving unemployment benefits.
Yeah, and that's why you have to have an economy where jobs are being created, and you have to make it easy for employers to take people on. I mean, look, take youth unemployment for argument's sake. There are 1 million youngsters now out of work between 16 and 24. That figure is up 40% in the last 7 or 8 years. Most of them, let's be honest, are unskilled but are looking for work. I don't buy this argument that all of our youngsters are lazy and useless. I really don't believe that. And yet we're about to open the door to Bulgaria and Romania to get more unlimited cheap labour. So there are lots of things we can do to try to help our own people who are out of work.
Right, so big cuts to the NHS under you?
No, I'm not saying big cuts to the NHS. I'm saying big cuts to NHS management under us and a completely new organisational structure. Yes, and let's get some proper...
But the overall budget for NHS spending would remain the same as the coalition or less?
Well... you know, you're asking me to tell you what our manifesto will be in 2015. I am telling you that we have got, not just in the NHS, but throughout all of our public services, to make some serious management cuts and to get the thing on a proper footing where the focus and the concentration of the money is on the front line. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we'll change the NHS and take it away from being free at the point of use. I'm not suggesting any of that. But if we look at the way, I mean, look, people joke about, you know, my view on Europe. If we look at the way the French manage their budget, they're much more efficient with the money than we are. Let's learn from them.
Right, what about the welfare budget and in particular spending on pensioners? There's a debate going on at the moment, as you know, about the fact that the welfare budget for pensioners accounts for the vast majority of the whole social security budget. Would you look at that? Would you raise the age at which people retire? Would you cap the state pension?
I think there is a moral obligation for people that have contributed for, you know, in many cases half a century or more, that we have to honour that commitment. I think that's really, really important. I think in terms of retirement age, I mean, look, you know, Lloyd George brought in the old age pension at 65. That was back in 1908, when life, you know, if you got to 65, that was pretty good. And the whole thing's changed. I mean, I think life expectancy for a man now is about 78. For a woman, it's about 83. I mean, Blair touched on this with Frank Field back in 97. You know, Frank Field came back and said, we've got to do something about this. Sadly, nothing was done. In time, this is not a manifesto pledge, but it's me talking, in time, I think that the retirement age, if we have this conversation in 15 years' time, the retirement age will be heading towards 70 from 65. I have no doubt about that. Otherwise, it is going to be unsustainable with an ageing population to go on paying pensions at this level.
Scrapping the winter fuel allowance?
Well, I tell you something. I mean, I live in a village in Kent, where we get all sorts that come in the pub on a Sunday lunchtime, but quite a lot of them are quite wealthy. People who've been successful business people, or they come in for their lunchtime pint. And when Mr. Blair brought in the winter fuel allowance for everybody, including the wealthy, I mean, they all had a big laugh about it, and, well, that's a week's free drinking, and all this sort of thing.
So you would scrap it for wealthy pensioners?
Now, when you say to them, well, actually, what you contributed to was to get a pension, not to receive a fuel allowance, they now say, oh, but you can't take it away from me, it's my right. And that's the big challenge that we've got. That, you can give a dog a bone, that's easy, but trying to take the bone back is hard.
Does that mean you take it or not?
I think we have to have an honest conversation.
Meaning?
I think if benefits are universal, they're not really benefits. The idea of benefits is that it's there to help people.
So it sounds like you're saying you would take it away from the wealthiest pensioners.
Well, ultimately, I think I repeat the point. We've got to face the fact we have an ageing population. The number of pensioners in Britain is going up by about 500,000 people every year. We've got to get real.
Mm. And you agree with Mr. Cameron when he says he remains committed to keeping the triple lock guarantee on pension rises from 2015? As reported in the Times today.
Well, I mean, fine, yes, of course, that sounds great in theory, but at the end of the day, it's all about the economy, isn't it? And it's all about, can we get this country back to being prosperous, back to growing? I mean, in the 1980s...
a few minutes ago, you said we had a moral obligation to honour those pensioners who paid in.
We have a moral obligation to honour their pensions, yes, and I agree with that. Economy. But it doesn't mean that we can have, free fuel or fuel allowances for everybody else. So, yes, we'll honour it, but if we're going to honour it, and if we're going to have 500,000 more pensioners every year, we've got to create growth, and we've got to take Britain away from being obsessed with its relationship with Europe to actually being a global trading economy.
You wouldn't cap the state pension, it sounds like you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
OK. What about increasing corporation tax?
We should decrease corporation tax.
It's coming down to the low 20s. You want to bring it down further?
They're just mucking about with it. It's irrelevant.
They're bringing it down? How's that mucking about with it?
It's completely irrelevant.
Why?
If I was running a big business, I wouldn't be paying corporation tax in the UK, would I? I'd be based in Dublin, or I'd be based in Zurich, or somewhere like that.
You've already talked about the medium and small businesses, which are the sort of backbone of the British economy. Let's talk about them.
Well, generally, medium and small-sized businesses pay very, very low rates of corporation tax because generally retained profits are very small in those companies because people actually earn their living by taking money out of those companies. So the big area of corporation tax are the really big companies that do make big profits and have quite big retained profits because they have to invest in the future in plant, modernisation and all the rest of it. I remember when the Irish went down to corporation tax of 12.5%. And quite a lot of my friends who left London, went to Dublin, set up businesses there, and 25 years on, they're still there and they're thriving. And the Irish have showed us the way forward.
Well, you would want to compete with that level, would you?
Absolutely.
12.5%.
Absolutely. I mean, if you do that... I haven't
factored that into my maths a little earlier, so the shortfall would be even bigger.
No, we'd gain a huge amount more money because a lot more people would pay corporation tax in the UK. There is a very strong argument, and we saw it in the 80s, in Britain and in America to some extent, that if you cut taxes, people then come back to this country and pay taxes, and your revenues would go up significantly, not down.
VAT? 20% at the moment, would you put that up to try and recoup some of this shortfall of 70 billion?
No, the idea is not to put taxes up. The idea is to get taxes down. The idea is to leave people with more money in their pockets, which they spend in the economy. And the idea is that to compensate for that, you have to cut the level of government spending. And, we had this debate last week.
Well, you've only talked about
when George Osborne talked
about the NHS so far in terms of cutting.
No, I haven't. I've said all throughout our public services there are big efficiency savings that need to be made, and we've got to make them. We can't, this impression that George Osborne gave last week that he's cutting spending, and he came on the BBC. Yes, we've got £11.5 billion worth of cuts for next year. We're borrowing £12 billion a month. We're in real trouble. Our public services, our overseas aid, all the things we're spending money on, we can't afford to go on as we are. We have to make big cuts. And actually, government spending is going up.
Yes. So you're going to have to make identify some really big ticket items to make up this.
Well, we did last time. We did in 2010. We identified £90 billion worth of cuts. That was the last manifesto. But you're quite right. Nobody will believe what we say unless we're able to put down on paper, costed, where the cuts need to come. And that is work in progress.
Right, OK. So, if we think generally about public services, you've mentioned the NHS, so you're looking at the education budget, are you? We are looking at the way we operate and manage our public services in this country. And as I said before, there are some very good examples across the water in Europe of governments that are doing it very much better than we are. But you think you can make efficiency savings of billions and tens of billions of pounds without it affecting the service delivery?
Well, certainly if you look at the cost of the Quangos to Britain,
how much do you think they cost?
Well, 60 to 70 billion pounds a year, roughly what we're spending on Quangos. Now, I'm not saying.
That's not
no,
right.
I'm not saying.
Those figures are wrong.
I'm not saying we scrap them all.
With respect, those figures are wrong.
Well, Taxpayers Alliance figures.
Quangos cost just over 30 billion. Those are the figures from last year.
I think the Taxpayers Alliance reckon it's a lot higher than that.
Well,
but anyway.
I've got a document from the Cabinet Office, which is called the Cabinet Office Public Bodies Report from last year. Quangos cost just over 30 billion, not the 60 billion you say.
It's still a massive sum of money.
Well, it's a big
sometimes
deal. Well, is it 60 or 30?
Difficult.
I mean, I don't know. Just pluck figures from the air,
can you? Whether it's 60 or 30, the point is
30.
Quangos are huge.
It's 30.
Fine. Even if we accept, Victoria, your figure, it's still vast. We've got to come up with a full costed manifesto. We haven't done that yet. And if you had this conversation with Ed Miliband or anybody else, they haven't got a costed budget for 2015 either. But what I'm telling you is the general direction we want to go in is government spending.
It's quite a big deal if you're telling people Quangos are costing 60 billion and actually it's 30 billion.
Well, I haven't
I
haven't sat down and read the Pink Book for breakfast, but I do know roughly what we're spending on the EU, roughly what we're spending on foreign aid, roughly what we're spending on our public services. And I'm telling you that we, as a party that has broadened from being what might have been said 10 years ago to be a protest movement at European elections into a fully fledged political party, that is work in progress.
Let's hear from some listeners. Simon in Somerset, Andy in Cookstown and Gary in Norwich. Welcome all of you. Hello.
Good morning, Victoria.
Hi. Simon, do you want to go ahead, talk to Nigel Farage?
Yeah, hello, Nigel.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. A couple of things. Firstly, given the fact that signing of the Lisbon Treaty was actually a treasonous act under the Magna Carta, can you explain why, as somebody who's against the EU, you don't use words such as treason? The other question I have for you is, given the fact that tax avoidance would actually, if we pursued tax avoiders, we would actually cover the debt that the government currently has, what would he do to actually go after tax avoiders?
Well, number one is, I don't use words like treason and traitor. I don't think we need to.
But it is a treasonous act. Well, given the Magna Carta, the Crown, the only people who can give up sovereignty is us. The Crown cannot give up our sovereignty under the Magna Carta, which is a very old, very illustrious document that gave us our freedom in the first place.
Let Mr. Farage.
No, I do understand.
It was a treasonous act.
I do understand what you're saying, but, politics is about engaging the population in a debate. And if you use words like treason and traitorous and talk about the Magna Carta, you'll find that the eyes will glaze over and people will not want to engage in the debate. So the language that I choose to use is that almost an entire generation of career politicians in Britain have willfully and deliberately signed away our ability to govern our own country and to be the masters of our own destiny, and we want to get that back. And if you use words like sovereignty, if you talk about the Magna Carta, I'm afraid people switch off. Now, secondly,
tax avoidance.
Well, it really goes back to the conversation that Victoria and I were just having. If we Margaret Hodge is having this huge argument about where giant corporations pay their tax. Part of being in the European single market is that we decided you could pay tax wherever you wanted to, including in Switzerland. And my argument is, if you think a big corporation paying its tax in Ireland, not the UK, is tax avoidance, and you could argue that it is, then what you do is you get your taxes to a rate where they come and pay it here. And exactly the same applies for income tax. Exactly the same applies for all of those things. Tax avoidance is not illegal. It is something that will go on, has gone on forever, and the simpler you make the British tax system and the fairer it's perceived to be, the less people will bother to avoid tax. They'll simply just pay it.
If it was simpler in the UK, would you not have set up that trust fund in an offshore tax haven? I
think the reason that I did that, I've now closed it, but the reason I did it, and the reason that tens of thousands of people every year were doing it in those days, is because, frankly, inheritance tax is a form of double taxation. You know, you die suddenly, you leave the children the family home, they're grieving, but they very quickly have to sell the house because they can't afford the tax bill. And I think that is a very unfair tax if we got rid of inheritance tax, which actually doesn't raise very much money and costs a huge amount to administer. If we got rid of inheritance tax, people would not put money in different jurisdictions.
So was it a mistake when you set that trust up?
Yes, I wasn't suitable for it at all. Two reasons. Firstly, I wasn't rich enough to do it. And secondly, and tax avoidance, you know, it's your own code, isn't it, of what you think's right and wrong. I didn't feel comfortable with it, which is why I never used it.
Well, you did initially. That's why you set it up.
No, I set it up. I never used it.
It took 4 or 5 years for you to close it down.
I never used it. I never put a penny piece into it. I never used it. I put money in to set it up, and I never ever used it. I didn't feel comfortable, frankly, with it in the end. And even though it was perfectly legal, it didn't suit me.
Okay. Right, we're going to talk to Andy now. Hi, Andy.
Hello there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to ask Michael, now you have representatives of your party over here in Northern Ireland, how much they may support my business. I'm a dairy farmer, and I'm currently expected to produce cheap milk for supermarkets at even below cost per price. Now, in return, I have to do environmental standards and welfare standards, which are extremely high in world standards. But in return for EU subsidy, if Great Britain leaves the EU, will UKIP continue to pay the same level of subsidies to us farmers to ensure that we stay afloat for producing this good, cheap food? Or, on the other hand, will you be happy if people start complaining about the price of food going up in the supermarkets in return?
Listen, firstly, I've got, huge sympathy for your plight, and I know that dairying has been just a nightmarish business to be in. Secondly, I think, we must accept that UK agriculture has not been governed by the British government now for 40 years.
But, sorry, Andy's point is that he will be worse off if we leave the EU.
Well,
how would you help him?
actually, I could show you swathes of agriculture where actually the British are not operating on a level playing field against the rest of Europe. Different standards, different levels of enforcement. Stuart Agnew,
what about Andy's subsidies, which he currently gets at the moment, which he wouldn't get if we were out of the EU?
Stuart Agnew, who's one of our MEPs and comes from a big farming family, was actually in Northern Ireland recently talking to farmers, pointing out that UKIP's policy will be we will continue with agricultural subsidy, but we'll do it on a different basis. We'll do it on the basis that what we want farmers to do is not to have lots of their land not in productive use, which is the current way of doing things. We will encourage farmers to produce as much as they possibly can and maintain subsidy. And actually, right across UK farming, we're now beginning to see a significant number of people who feel we'd be far better off running our own agricultural industry.
So you're saying you would match the subsidies to people like Andy that he currently receives from the EU?
Yes, because we can change the subsidies and the way in which they're paid. And at the moment, quite a lot of it
would they be the same value?
They are the same value, but with a different emphasis. Because at the moment, quite a lot of it is frankly box ticking in terms of the environment. I'm not against the environment, but actually, most farmers you talk to actually want their land to be in full production. And at the moment, we have a system where, despite the fact there are billions in the world without sufficient food, we have deliberately designed, or Brussels have deliberately designed, a system where we're not up to maximum production, and we need to be.
Right. So that's another level of spending which I didn't include in my sums earlier.
Oh no, that's all.
That shortfall's getting bigger.
Excuse me. No, it isn't. No, of course it's not. Because at the moment, we pay in. Talking round figures, we pay £20 billion a year into the EU, and we get 10 billion back, okay? And some of the money we get back, or much of it, is spent on agricultural subsidy. So we accept that point, and we always have. But as a subset, of course, to that common agricultural policy, you've also got the common fisheries policy, which has been an unmitigated disaster for this country. Something like 100,000 jobs lost in fishing and fishing-related industries across the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, I have to say, since 1973. And the sooner, like Norway, we take back our territorial waters, manage our own fish stocks, that alone will be a boost to the British economy.
Britain's net contribution to the EU last year was 7 billion, not 20 billion.
No, it's far more than that, 8.3. But I mean, let's not argue about figures.
It's absolutely crucial.
Right, okay. If you really want to play silly games, I said we put in 20 and get back 10. And actually, most listeners aren't bothered about a little bit here, a little bit there. We put in 18 last year, we got back, and we actually got back. Our net was about 8.3 billion. It's going up over the course of the next few years. So let's talk in round figures.
Let's be clear then. Yeah, let's be absolutely clear. Our net contribution to the EU was 7 billion a few moments ago.
I say it was 8.3, right, and that's because the figures you've got are not the right figures.
A few moments ago, you said it was 20 billion.
Well, in fact, it was 8. Okay, cut 2 off the top of each, and then we're fine. The ratios were correct. You see, this is the problem, isn't it? If actually, do we want to engage people in the big debate? Or do we want to sit here and go through statistics that are almost meaningless to people? The fact is we pay.
This is British taxpayers' contribution to the EU.
All right, £55 billion a day. All right, if you want to play that game, we pay £55 million a day.
7 billion a year
into the European Union. No, because you can't act. Well, do you want to look at gross? Do you want to look at net?
That's net.
Well, you see, but in many ways, apart from the agricultural subsidy, a lot of the money that comes back from Brussels is spent in ways that we wouldn't choose. Very often, match funding is demanded by the European Union, and that's not costed into those figures. Whichever way you look at it, we are paying a significant sum of money, gross or net, to Brussels every year, and we say that is frankly unnecessary. But really, the contribution we pay is actually a very small part of the overall cost. We've talked about regulation and how much of it is very expensive and highly undesirable, but the opportunity cost that we are losing as an English-speaking nation that has always been a global trader to find ourselves as the world's 6th biggest nation forbidden from making our own trade arrangements around the rest of the world, when even little countries like Iceland and Switzerland are able to do it. We are losing out in the global race. Europe is losing out in the global race. The whole EU is falling behind, and I want us to push ahead.
Gary in Norwich, hello.
Hello, good morning.
Morning. Talk to Nigel Farage.
Good morning.
2 points, really. I just wondered, basically, if you win the election in 2015... basically, who are we going to trade with? Because we won't be trading with Europe. And secondly, do you walk away from the biggest trade agreement ever signed at the recent G8?
There was no trade agreement signed at the recent G8. Far from it. There is talk of the EU and the US having a trade deal. David Cameron sort of masquerades as if he's got something to do with it. He's got nothing to do with it. This is a negotiation between the unelected European Commission and the Americans. It's already hit the buffers because the French, frankly, don't want it. And there are lots and lots of trade deals out there. You've got countries out there like Canada, Australia, screaming at Britain, saying, why can't we have a sensible tariff-free arrangement? And we apologetically have to say back to them, sorry, nothing we can do. Go and ask an unelected European Commissioner. So on that point, we'll be global. And please don't listen. I know that Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative would sit here and say it'll cost us 3 million jobs and the sky will fall in if we leave the EU. Bear this in mind as we're doing specific figures today. The last year for which we have figures, European Union companies sold us £45 billion worth of goods more than we sold them. It's something like 200 billion over the course of the last 5 years. There is no chance that Mercedes or my favourite Rioja producer will not want to go on selling their products in Britain. We are living in a modern global economy. Nowhere else in the world do you need to be in a political union to buy and sell things from each other.
But no one suggested they would stop selling us stuff. The issue is that British businesses, which currently have tariff-free access to this huge market, would suddenly have to start paying tariffs. It would be more expensive for them.
Well, if we paid tariffs, then they'd have to pay tariffs.
Why would they?
So you're saying to me that we leave the European Union, Mercedes can go on selling their cars in Britain tariff-free, but our products would be charged a tax in Germany. I don't think that's the way international business and the world works at a practical, pragmatic level. Now, there's not going to be a trade war. If we said that 3 million jobs in Britain were involved in manufacturing either goods or selling services to other parts of Europe, then the corresponding European figure is between 5 and 6 million jobs that utterly depend there on their products coming here. And let's not think that we're back in the 50s and 60s. because of GATT, because of the World Trade Organization, global tariffs on manufactured goods have come down to a very, very low level. Mexico has a tariff-free agreement to do business with us and the European Union. Something like 50 countries do. It should be a lot more. We will go on doing business. And, the same applies for investors. Investors coming in. I mean, I did a big program the other week with Sir David Tang, billionaire, Hong Kong businessman, now advisor to the Chinese government. And he was asked, what would happen to investments in Britain? He said, look, whether Britain's in or out of the European Union, we'll invest in Britain if it's the right place to be. Business is much more hard-nosed than people think.
OK, well, it is 5 Live, 10:46. Nigel Farage is with us. He's the leader of UKIP. As we talk to him, as you talk to him, a debate is going on in the Commons right now on a Friday morning. A little bit unusual to see the Commons so full on a Friday about James Wharton, a Conservative backbencher's private member's bill on an EU referendum. It effectively would enshrine the promise of a referendum and the timing in law. Let's just dip into it again.
In 2008. And that is what my honourable friend must remember. And then there are honourable members opposite on the Labour benches, we've heard from some of them already, who support a referendum. This bill is their chance. It's the best chance currently available to make it happen. It wouldn't only be a badge of honour for them, it would help to show their weak leadership, some real leadership that is sorely needed. And this is not the first time the question of whether to consult the people has caused unmitigated dither, muddle and confusion in the leadership opposite. When the last Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, was trying to decide whether to call a general election in 2007, he asked the current Leader of the Opposition, the current Shadow Foreign Secretary, the current Shadow Chancellor, resulting in the decision taking so long they never made a decision at all and never held a general election. The impulse to trust the people is not exactly their hallmark. And now we wonder, what is Labour's policy? The Shadow Defence Secretary is not here. The Right Member for East Renfrewshire said in October, I think at some point there will have to be a referendum on the EU. I don't think it's for today or for the next year, but I think it should happen. My preference would be an in or out referendum when the time comes. But the Leader of the Opposition told the House in January, we don't want an in-out referendum. And
that's William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, putting Labour on the spot, and you're chuckling.
You've got to laugh, haven't you? I mean, here he is saying, absolutely, we're the party that believes in a referendum. Remember, the last time this came up in the House of Commons was October 2011, so not long ago, when there was an amendment down to say there should be an in-out referendum, and William Hague and David Cameron three-line whipped their own MPs to say vote against it, and went publicly to say we don't need a referendum.
They've changed their mind. It happens in politics.
I know, and it's very funny. It's very, very funny.
Do you accept that a Conservative government at the next election is the only hope you have of getting an in-out referendum?
No. I mean, look, let's just accept why.
How would it happen otherwise?
Today's debate wouldn't even be happening if the parties didn't feel challenged by UKIP. The Conservatives have now moved to this supposedly pro-referendum position. The difficulty is, and the real reason for having the debate today is that when Cameron made the speech in January, a lot of the public said, yeah, but we've heard that before. You were the guy that gave us a cast-iron guarantee over the Lisbon Treaty. So really, this bill was pushed from the backbenchers to try to say to the public, we won't let him wriggle out of it this time.
But how will a referendum happen if it's not a Conservative majority at the next election?
Labour will promise a referendum too, and the Lib Dems will promise a referendum too. Of course. At the moment, Miliband may look indecisive and weak. He is not going to want to lose a general election on this question. They will all promise a referendum. Actually, do you know what? They've all promised a referendum at every election since 1997 and never deliver one to us. And that perhaps is another reason people vote UKIP, as they actually know where we stand. We've seen the Conservatives' position, we've seen Labour flip-flop, and the Liberal Democrats, goodness knows how many times in the last couple of years have changed their minds. I believe when the next election comes, they will all be promising a referendum. And I think the best chance, frankly, the best chance we've got of actually getting a referendum is to have enough UKIP MPs in the House of Commons in 2015 to absolutely make sure that it happens.
Well, how many MPs do you think you'll have after that?
I don't know, but if you'd said to me 6 months ago that we get nearly a quarter of the vote in the local elections, even if you said it to me privately, I wouldn't have believed you. So things are changing. There are big changes happening in politics, not just in Britain, but actually in many other parts of Europe too. I think it's very difficult to call. But, there is an astonishing opinion poll in today's Daily Mirror, which has Labour flatlining on 35%, has the Tories on 22% and UKIP on 21%. Now, one mustn't get excited by one poll, but it does show that politics is in a very big state of flux. And I honestly think...
So you wouldn't like to put a number on...
Well, that would be a very, very foolish thing for me to do. I mean, I might go to the bookmakers first, but, no, I don't know. I mean, there are ifs and buts with this. We have a first-past-the-post electoral system. It is very difficult for new parties to break through. UKIP, if it manages to succeed in the European elections next year, on May the 22nd, we will then have some serious momentum going into 2015. It's not an easy call, but... we've got some very, very firm, distinct views, not just on Europe, but on how Britain ought to be run, our belief in grammar school opportunities for children, our belief, as we've touched on simpler, lower taxes. We've got a huge amount of work to do in terms of professionalising our party, getting our manifesto right, but I do think we're travelling in the right direction.
I'm interested, have you had any meetings with senior Tories or Conservative backbenchers or Tory ex-ministers about being brought back into the Conservative fold?
Not for a very long time.
When was the last time you had such a discussion?
I mean, the last time they tried to poach me, as it were, was quite a long time ago.
When was that?
2005. So it's a long, long time
Right,
ago.
so no one's had that conversation with you in the last 12 months?
No, I think because they know they'd be wasting their time. There are two types of people in politics. There are those that want to be something and achieve rank and position and distinction, and there are those type of people in politics who are campaigners and crusaders who want to change the world. And I'm a member of the second category. I can't be bought off.
So no one said to you, look, if we got rid of David Cameron, would you consider rejoining the Conservative Party, Mr Farage? Oh,
no. I mean, the kind of conversation would be, if you were to come and help Mr Cameron, I'm sure we could find you a good seat and a nice position. That's how politics generally works.
Someone's had that conversation with you?
Not since 2005.
Right, OK.
And they know I'm not interested.
Alan in Cardigan. Hello, Alan. Good morning.
Hello.
Hi, and we'll speak to Rob in a moment. Rob, welcome to the programme.
Hello.
Hi. Alan, go ahead.
I was interested in your remarks, Mr Farage, about health and safety at work, and if you scrapped a lot of it, it would be good for business. My father was buried alive in a hole that wasn't shored up properly because it would cost the employer some money, and I've spent 30 years as a scaffolder and a safety officer and seen how many accidents at work happen because of economies by employers. And before the health and safety rigs, those employers had to pay out a lot of money in compensation. Now what they do, they have to pay out a lot of money in training people so that they can say afterwards it was his own fault, he's been trained. They want it both ways. How can it work that health and safety is bad for business?
Well, I'm not advocating a return to putting children up chimneys, I mean, that's not what I'm saying.
No,
and I understand
a reduction of health and safety.
Well, I understand we need to be, that we need to get a balance right with these things, and I'm suggesting the balance has gone too far the other way. I mean, just a little example. The last time I had the house painted, which was about 7 or 8 years ago, a couple of blokes turned up with some ladders and painted the house, and that was fine. And then I had the house repainted last summer. I'd been away for a few days. I came back. I thought they were demolishing it. There was scaffolding up all around the house and a massive added cost. And in fact, the cost of getting it repainted was so great that I'd actually put it off for a couple of years. So I think, we can get to a situation where a combination of European law plus often over-interpretation in this country makes it very difficult for businesses to offer services cheap. And I think the Working at Height directive has gone just too far.
Alan, thank you. Rob, hello.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nigel, I am a black British member of society. And my question to you is, because I'm a step away from joining your party, because you totally infuse me with your views and the way you crusade to change the world. What's your views on trading with the rest of the world, and particularly the black nations like Africa?
That's very interesting. What we do with Africa is we help our consciences by giving money in foreign aid, not worrying too much where the money ends up. But in reality, what are we doing to Africa? Well, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're stopping them from trading their way out of poverty by putting massive agricultural tariffs on green beans and other products that come from Africa. Worse than that, we're now bribing black African governments to allow predominantly Spanish, but also Portuguese and Greek fishing vessels to go off West Africa and literally destroying an ecosystem, and for thousands of artisan African fishermen, a way of life that's been going on for thousands of years, is being destroyed. The EU approach to Africa, frankly, is a new form of colonialisation. It's disgusting. And I believe what we've got to do, if we really want to help those African countries, we've got to give them the opportunity to fish and to grow produce and to be able to sell that produce to us. And that would do a lot more good than any foreign aid ever would.
Rob, thank you. 5 to 11. You've got 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Thank you for giving us so much of your time today. You've been an MEP since 1999.
I know, it's unbelievable.
In 2009, you were asked how much you'd claimed in expenses, and you said it was 2 million, pushing 2 million. What would it be now?
Absolutely no idea. But what I do know is what I do know is there are now some figures that have been compiled, and I am on the expenses side of things one of the cheapest British MEPs.
What do you think it would be now?
No idea.
4 years on?
I've no idea.
2.5 million?
I've no idea.
2.3 million?
No idea. Well, I'll tell you what it is.
But more than 2 million.
I tell you what it is. Every British MEP is costing the British taxpayer about £1.25 million a year.
Why are you claiming it then?
So, well, that's what it costs. That is the cost.
Why do you claim the expenses then? Why do you claim the allowance?
Because if I was rich, I would pay my own flights and my own travel and my own hotels. I'm not.
But the salary of 81,000 isn't enough.
Well, if I was having to pay 30% of that in travel costs and accommodation costs, the answer clearly, patently, is no.
Right.
So, but I could, of course, rather than being here with you, I could, of course, be in Brussels today, signing a book and getting €300 tax-free. But I'm not. I'm here talking to you. I'm one of the least money-grabbing MEPs there is.
How have you spent that 2 and a bit million then?
Well, I don't know that that's the figure, but
well, it was 2 million in 2009, so it's more than that now.
This was. Do you know who came up with this rubbish? Dennis McShane, who in the end was kicked out of politics for behaving appallingly.
Well, he asked you what you claimed
expenses.
Up to then, and you said pushing.
I didn't say I'd claimed anything. I said, what have I cost the taxpayer? I would think that if you get somebody objective to look at the figures, they're all a matter of public record. You can find them out for yourself. But what I do know is the last time one of these surveys was done, I was one of the cheapest.
Right. You say you haven't got the money. You've donated £11,000 of your own money to UKIP funds. You've got money somewhere, haven't you?
I did give some money to UKIP last year. I gave less than that the year before, and the year before that I gave nothing. And that just depends on a variety of reasons. I do try and help my own party if I can, yes.
Right. You voted back in 2011 against a pay rise for Euro MPs, which would have taken your salary from 66 to 81. Why did you take that extra money then, if you were against it? Well,
I stated my position. I was in the losing minority. That's what they choose to pay us. That's what they choose to pay us. I mean, look, people say...
you were against that rise?
Well, yes, and that happens in Westminster too, and it happens through all walks of life. I voted against it. I lost the vote. They pay us more money. I don't really see that as being terribly hypocritical in the scale of what goes on.
It's just that you say the expenses and allowances system and the salaries and so on are pretty reprehensible, but then you go along with it and claim that stuff.
As I say, the idea that for doing nothing, if you choose, you can sign on every single day for €300 is tax-free, is truly astonishing. But I don't do that. I'm only there once or twice a week. Other people are there 5 days a week. We all make our own decisions. We all decide.
Sure. I'm just checking. You don't think it's hypocritical.
We all decide what's right and what is wrong. What I do know is that if I hadn't been able to be paid to do a job and for travel and accommodation and things like that, I wouldn't have been able, over the course of what is now nearly 15 years, to have travelled the length and breadth of this country, trying to wake people up to what the European project was really all about and trying to offer a positive solution. And I think it's...
So is that how you spent the money, travelling up and down the UK?
I spent a lot of money travelling up and down the UK. Of course I do.
Not 2 and a bit million, though. That's a lot of travelling. Well, you
work it out over 15 years. You work it out over 15 years. And there's no elected politician in Britain has travelled and spoken at more meetings, public events, schools, Rotary clubs, you name it, than I've done over the course of the last 15 years. And I think it's had an effect. And I think that if I hadn't done that with the support of thousands of people who voluntarily, come and help UKIP and help me in what I'm doing, I think if we hadn't done that, the debate in Westminster wouldn't even be happening today. I think we are moving things forward. The idea that was put about in the old days that we were somehow anti-Europe and anti-foreigner, I think people are seeing through this and realising we love Europe. We want to trade with Europe and be friends with Europe, but we don't want to be governed by Herman Van Rompuy and all the rest of them.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving us so much time today.
Thank you.
Nigel Farage is the leader of UKIP, and thank you for talking to him as well.